Hi there, and welcome to Active Listening and Communication for Better Understanding, a training module for the Grant Professionals Association Mentoring Program. I'm Amanda Paveglio. I'm a member of the GPA Mentoring Task Force, and I'm the Manager of Grant Services for the Lancaster-Lebanon Intermediate Unit 13, an education support agency based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I'm also mostly a remote worker, meaning that while my employer is in Lancaster, I actually live in State College, Pennsylvania, which is about 125 miles away from my agency's headquarters. Although I attend some meetings in person, most of the time I interact with my coworkers over the phone, video, email, and/or instant message or chat. Working remotely has given me a great opportunity to think about and reflect on my own communication strengths and weaknesses, as well as those of my coworkers. This is a sign that I keep tacked up over my desk in my home office. I got it from my dad, an engineer, while I was still in college. He was accustomed to dealing with pretty bad communicators. And it says, "I know you believe you understand what you think I said. However, I'm not sure you realize that what I think you heard is not what I meant." In grad school and in my early career, this statement used to just be amusing because we've all been involved in communication gaffes. But now that I work remotely and I do most of my communication using email and phone, I try to keep this idea in my head and over my desk as a cautionary measure. Am I being clear when I communicate? Am I sending the message that I mean to? Could my email be read wrong? Am I making assumptions about how my message will be interpreted? So here's the goal of the GPA mentoring program: to create a program that will help both mentors and mentees grow professionally. GPA members will have mentoring support to help them solve their biggest professional career challenges. And the program's success will depend on good communication, because you can't have trusting, productive relationships without good communication. Good communication comes from both listening and speaking, and this session is focused on listening skills. Why do we want to have GPA mentors revisit their listening skills? Well, there's two main reasons. First, we usually don't get training in listening. Most business communications training is on writing and speaking, how to create and present ideas, whether via report writing, email, PowerPoint slides, etc. And as grant professionals, presenting ideas convincingly is our job, after all. So any training we engage in is generally to hone our writing, speaking, and explaining skills. But how to listen generously to others' ideas gets a lot less time. Secondly, it's our hope that after this webinar, you as a mentor will have some awareness of active listening techniques and potential communication barriers. So even if your mentee doesn't have that same level of awareness starting out, as you work together, you can help them gain some awareness and head off some communications challenges before they start. So today we're going to talk about active listening, how we define it, and what it typically looks like. We're also going to give you some practical tips on how to practice active listening remotely, over the phone, video chat, email, and maybe even text and instant message. I'll be drawing on my own experience quite a bit for this section. We'll also talk about some of the mental aspects of active listening, regardless of what communication mode or tool you're using. And there'll be a few final thoughts to remember as you start working with your mentees. So first, how do we define active listening? This definition from businessdictionary.com says that it's the act of mindfully hearing and attempting to comprehend the meaning of words spoken by another in conversation or speech. Active listening can involve making sounds that indicate attentiveness, as well as the listener giving feedback in the form of a paraphrased rendition of what has been said by the other party for their confirmation. That's a lot of words. So generally, if you wanted to boil that down, here are the key points. You want to be an engaged, fully attentive conversation partner, listening to understand and to reduce misunderstanding, and letting your conversation partner know verbally and non-verbally, as you can, that you are giving them your full attention as you listen. When there is a lack of good listening, communication is often misinterpreted, which can result in errors and omissions and wasted time and or poor decision making. And we really don't want any of that in the GPA mentoring program. Poor listening can also lead to interpersonal conflict, especially if the person who's speaking feels that the listener is not paying close attention. And we also really don't want that either in the GPA mentoring program. So the ultimate goal of active listening is to minimize confusion about communications. You want to prevent assumptions. You want to prevent either person from jumping to conclusions or filling in the blanks mentally but incorrectly. And you want to prevent hurt feelings because, quote, quote, you weren't listening. And I'll just show you this sign again. This sort of sums up the kind of confusion that can happen. We want to avoid this. So in traditional communications training, they might say that active listening would typically include eye contact and body language that indicates attentiveness and empathy. These could be facial expressions, this could be head nods or head shakes, no. An occasional well-timed or uh-huh. Using these nonverbal cues lets your conversation partner know you're listening and following without you interrupting to tell them that. But if you're not physically present with the other person and you're mostly interacting through some kind of technology, what then? GPA anticipates that most mentoring relationships and interactions will occur over some distance using phone, Skype, or video chat, and or email. Ours is a very large national organization. We've got people all over the place, and I just know even myself, there are no other GPA members within about a 200-mile radius of where I live. So I will be communicating with a mentor or a mentee using technology like this. So the nonverbal aspects of active listening are going to be pretty much impossible, or nearly so, in those situations. So let's start with phone and or video chat. I've labeled this, quote, real time, because with these tools, your mentee will actually be talking to you, and you'll be listening and responding right back, and vice versa. You'll have an audio connection and maybe a video connection too. First off, don't assume that you won't have much benefit from body language or eye contact, even if you're using video chat. The video may be jumpy or distorted, or you may only see your mentee's face, but not their hands. So you'll have to listen to how they're talking, the tone, their speed, where they're pausing, are they laughing, etc. If you're on the phone, try closing your eyes while you listen so you can focus more closely on the words they're saying. Word choice can also be a clue as to how they're feeling or what they're thinking in that particular moment. For example, if I'm mad at my cat today for some reason, I might refer to him as my stupid cat in passing, even if I'm not even talking really about my cat. You want to do what you can to help your mentee focus on your words too. Give them a good audio experience. Minimize distractions on your end like background noise, food chewing, a window that looks over on a busy street that's open, etc. And consider using a headset so that they can hear you better. Also, remember that if you're using a laptop, the little built-in microphone in your laptop, it'll pick up your voice, but if you're typing while you talk, it'll also pick up a lot of clackety-clackety typing and keyboard noises, which can be very distracting. And this is another good reason to use a headset. If you're talking with your mentee on the phone, you won't be able to see each other. So it's important for you to describe your emotions and reactions to them clearly. If you're happy or you're sharing good news, smile while you talk. If you're feeling happy for something they've said, when it's your turn to speak, say things like, I'm so happy for you right now, or I wish you could see me. I'm waving my hands around from excitement. Make your emotions clear so that they don't have to guess or assume how you're feeling. Also, use effective interjections to show your interest, like, ooh, oh, cool. Don't interrupt their train of thought, but do let them know you're tracking with them and maintaining interest and focus in what they're saying. Remember, if you're nodding along, they won't be able to see you. Periodically, repeat back or paraphrase what you've heard and make a point of doing this. You might say, for example, So what you've told me so far is you're thinking about setting up your own consulting business, but you're not sure how to figure out if there's a demand for your services where you live. Is that right? This does two things. First, it shows you've listened to and understood what they've said. And two, if somehow you've misunderstood something, it'll provide an early opportunity to correct that point before you move on so that you don't have to backtrack in the conversation. If you're meeting with your mentee over video chat like Skype or FaceTime, you'll be able to see each other to a certain extent. So you want to use your facial expressions and your head movements. Nod, smile, shake your head. If you're a person who talks with your hands, do that too. I'm actually talking with my hands right now, even though I know you can't see me. Remember that eye contact is really hard over video chat. Have you ever noticed that? Usually your computer gives you an image of the person you're talking with, and our natural human tendency is to look at that image. But the spot on your screen there where their face is typically not where the camera lens is on your computer, and that lens is what collects the image that they see. So if you're looking at their face on your screen, what they see is your eyes kind of maybe somewhere else, and vice versa. There's no real good way around this, but remember to try to look at your camera lens, not the image of your mentee's face, at least from time to time, because this will help them feel like you're actually looking into their eyes and maintaining eye contact a little bit better. If you're going to be looking elsewhere frequently during your meeting, perhaps to take notes on a notepad or you're looking at something on a second monitor, tell them that up front so that they're not put off or offended by you constantly looking away. Also, consider your Wi-Fi bandwidth and the environment you're in. Can your connection handle a live video stream? Is the lighting and camera angle okay? Do you look good or do you look scary? And is what's in the background appropriate? For all these real-time communication methods, remember to try to simply listen without judgment. If you have a judgmental reaction to something that your mentee has said, it may show on your face or in your voice. Also, as you're planning out your mentoring sessions, you may want to plan for engagement checkpoints within the conversation. For example, if you know you're going to be talking about a specific subject, you could recap by saying, so far we've talked about this and this and this, and you said that you felt this way, but here's what you want to do about it. Have I got that right? Just remember, your overall goal is to minimize the need for your mentee to make assumptions about what you're saying or what they see you doing. So those real-time methods are fairly close to in-person conversation in that the back and forth takes place continuously. But what about email? You can certainly have a conversation over email, but it's time delayed. And a lot of unrelated external factors can exert influence during the delays. So I would say probably the best thing you can do with your mentee is to set some norms with them during the get to know you period, the first part of your year of mentoring, about email norms. Set expectations about response times and methods. For example, you might say, you can typically expect a reply from me same day if you send it before 4 o'clock. And I can typically expect a reply from you within 2 days. Please do this thing to let me know if you need a reply more quickly than normal. And I will always let you know when I am super busy with work, and thus you might get delayed responses. And then this is how I'll let you know. Laying down these kind of ground rules will avoid or help avoid you getting annoyed with each other when somebody's not meeting some kind of unspoken expectation about how to communicate. Second, when you get an email from your mentee, just read it first without judgment before you compose a response. You don't want to just read the first couple sentences, assume you know what the rest is going to say, then skim the rest of the message, miss something important, and send a response that's off base. Also, as you're just reading their message, try to read between the lines for any other messages that might be buried in there but not actually said outright. You might get a sense of frustration or sadness, even if they're not obliquely saying, I am frustrated. Don't reply to an email if you're angry or highly emotional, even if your mentee is not the cause of that emotion. If you're mad at your spouse or your boss, that anger may influence how you write to your mentee. And if you have to reply right then, it may be best to say, I'm a little upset right now about something unrelated to you or your question. I will reply by a certain time after I've had a chance to clear my head. That way you've acknowledged them, but they understand why you're not replying right away. Finally, when you do write or reply to your mentee, tune out all the distractions that you can. Although it may feel like efficient multitasking, don't compose emails to them during unrelated meetings or while you're on a webinar. You will probably mess something up that way just because the brain can't quite split that many ways at once. It's usually a good practice to read an email out loud before you hit send because you might find typos, half-finished sentences, or you might notice you've forgotten an attachment that you referenced. Make sure you also clarify sentences that might be misunderstood and consider what emotion you might seem to be writing with. Do you come across as being angry or arrogant or just really super distracted when you don't mean to? Remember, your goal is to minimize the need for your mentee to make assumptions about what they're reading. So when you're replying to a long email or an email that addresses various points, you might want to try to set it out like a conversation. Quote each of their points one by one with your own response after each point. It'll make it easier to follow your reply, and your answers to different issues won't get confused. What part is she answering when she wrote this sentence? You can avoid that. Also, don't quote irrelevant parts of the original email. Just quote the issues you're responding to. Also, keep in mind that what you send may not look the same once they receive it. Email hardware and software sometimes makes formatting, like fonts, underlines, colors, bullet points, get all strange, or sometimes even completely disappear. So don't over-format the text of your emails or rely on formatting to get your point across. Keep your paragraphs short, around 50 words or less. They are easier to read and easier to understand, especially when being read on a computer screen or on a phone. In terms of texting, abbreviations, these can be problematic unless both you and your mentee decide they're okay. Sometimes they're difficult to decode and could lead to misunderstanding. The ones that I've listed here stand for, I don't know, I don't care. What do you think? Just kidding. But I'll tell you what, I didn't know what IDC meant before I was putting together this webinar. So if someone had sent that to me, I would have had to ask them, what does that mean? Finally, use emoticons or smileys tactically. They can help add context to an email or a text message. For example, if I say, yeah, right, with a smile, it's probably more positive than if I say, yeah, right, with a frown. But sometimes email software will make emoticons look wrong or not appear. Plus, overuse can get a bit immature. Texting or instant message is probably not the best primary vehicle for you to have a mentor-mentee relationship. But it can be good for a quick check-in like, hey, how'd your job interview go? Or good luck with a new client. So again, do what's necessary to minimize the need for your mentee to make assumptions about what you're sending them. Use abbreviations sparingly and use smileys tactically. Use proper punctuation, and especially if you voice dictate your texts, spell check before you hit send. I have sent some very embarrassing things a couple of times to people over text because I thought Siri was getting down accurately what I was saying, and she wasn't. So, also, don't text when you're highly emotional. You might send the wrong message without meaning to. In this case, you might just want to reply, I'm too emotional right now to have a good chat about this topic. Could I get back to you in an hour or so? So, what we've covered so far have been general practical tips to make communication more effective over the phone, video chat, email, and text. There is no best system here. It's really going to be up to you and your mentee to figure it out together during the get-to-know-you period when you start working together. So remember to talk about with them What communication styles and biases does each of you have? Does one of you have a serious tech barrier, like no webcam, or your employer won't let you download Skype on your computer? Also, what tools do you and your mentee have and like to use? Consider the different tools you might use. And remember that while most tools will archive your communications somehow, not all will. So if an archive of your communications is important to one of you or both of you, you'll want to keep that in mind when you're deciding how to interact with each other. Again, and I really want to emphasize this, we've talked about setting norms and expectations for response times and methods. Another example is if you personally have a rule where you don't email anybody after 9 p.m., make sure your mentee knows that. You might also want to think about how you would respond if your mentee wants to connect with you on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and other social networks. That would fall under boundary setting as well. Again, and I know I'm harping on this, the goal of active listening and good communication is to minimize confusion and assumptions. So far, we've talked about practical, tangible steps to take. But there's also a mental aspect to active listening that applies, regardless of what vehicle or tools you're using to communicate. And I want to talk about that next. Whether you're talking over the phone, over video, or having an in-depth email exchange, or meeting in person, because that could certainly happen in this as well. You want to do these things. You want to give your undivided attention and eliminate all the distractions that you can. You want to put yourself in your mentee's shoes or in their mind as you're talking. Don't judge and don't jump to conclusions as they're speaking. Don't rehearse your answer while pretending to listen to them. Don't interrupt with solutions or feedback until they've explained what it is that they want you to respond to. Seek to understand and don't pretend to understand. If you have to play things back and go over a point over and over, do that so things are clear. And finally, remember to listen between the lines. Finally, it's important to know yourself. The reason why misunderstandings happen so often is because we as humans don't always receive the same message that someone sends us. Every single one of us has a unique filter that's made up of past experiences, biases, and preferences, and information passes through that filter before it encodes in our brains. In this picture, a lot of information is hitting my ear. Most of it goes into my ear, although not all of it, because I have just a little bit of hearing loss on one side. But before it gets to my brain, it passes through this big, messy filter. And what comes out the other side of that filter is probably not the same information that was sent. It's reduced, it's maybe a little distorted. And the more of the original message, the more that original message was vague, the higher chance it gets distorted as it goes through my filter. But whatever gets through is what my brain then grabs onto and starts working with. For added fun, my filter changes from day to day and minute to minute. If I have 3 grant deadlines this week, I'm probably pretty preoccupied with those, and I'm more apt to get angry if I get some information that's going to interfere with my plans to meet those deadlines. If I haven't slept well, or if I'm having a low blood sugar episode, those factors will play into my filter. If I'm mad at my mom, some of that emotion will probably be in my filter. There's nothing inherently wrong with my filter. It's just part of what makes me, me. But it's taken me some time to get to know it and how to work with it and around it. I've started to learn what some of the sticky spikes are in my filter and what my biases are. And that, in turn, has made it easier for me to put my filter aside when I need to and just take in more pure information before I respond to something somebody writes or says to me. This module is not really meant to get into cognitive psychology or self-analysis too much or any of that, but nevertheless, I'd like to encourage you to think a little bit about what could be in your own filter, since it will have an impact on how you interpret and react to messages that pass between you and your mentee. Also, recognize that your mentee has a filter of his or her own, and that's going to influence how they interpret the messages you send. So the clearer you can make your outgoing messages, the less ambiguous they are, the more clearly your mentee will receive the message you meant to send. And this is especially true over long distance or time delayed communications. So there's 3 specific landmines I want to briefly touch on before we end. The first is called the ladder of inference. It's an automatic thinking process. Usually it's subconscious, and it's the way we get from information to action. One could call this the expressway through your mental filter. This is a picture, a graphic representation of how of the ladder and how it might lead to an action. In this example, a person observes another person looking at their phone during a meeting, not paying attention, instead of participating in the discussion. The observer then mentally layers on their own judgments or meanings to that and quickly makes assumptions, draws conclusions, and decides how to react. In a matter of seconds, they've decided that since David is looking at his phone, then David must not want to be at the meeting, and thus David shouldn't be invited to the next meeting. The problem is that the observer never bothered to find out why David was looking at his phone. He may have had a family emergency that he just had to stay on top of, but he didn't tell anyone. But the observer simply drew conclusions from a fairly small observation. This kind of problem can be especially common over time delay communication. If someone texts a last-minute message that says, "Hey, I won't be ready for our meeting, sorry," and doesn't offer any explanation, the person who receives that message has all kinds of opportunity to layer on their own meaning, draw conclusions, which will probably be negative, and decide a response without having all the facts. Active listening encourages us to listen without judgment for exactly this reason. We should make an effort to gather as much information as possible from our mentee before adding meaning and making assumptions and deciding what to do about it. Landmine number 2 is called the fundamental attribution error. This is the human tendency to explain someone's behavior based on internal factors like their personality, and to underestimate the amount that external factors like the situation might have on their behavior, which is a lot of words for essentially, when someone else acts badly, it's because they're a jerk, but when I act badly, it's just because I'm having a bad day. I will confess that I am guilty of this all the time, although I'm working to get better at it. Case in point, my boss is a program director who wears a lot of hats at our agency and is also working to finish her doctoral degree. Sometimes it's hard to get a hold of her or get a timely response because she's so busy, and there are weeks sometimes that go by where we only communicate over email. And even though we've set communications norms, sometimes she still breaks them. And then I have this exact reaction in my mind. I sent you an email 3 hours ago with urgent. Please respond in the subject heading. You haven't gotten back to me yet. Why do you hate me? Ugh, I want to punch you the next time I see you. This is what happens in my brain. And then I think, wait, no, stop. Just check her calendar first. And when I do, I see that she's got 3 meetings back to back today, and one of her doctoral classes is tomorrow, plus she has to take her daughter to swim practice this afternoon. Okay, so I tell myself to take a chill pill and solve my own problem to the extent that I can, and just be patient, because she doesn't hate me. It's not that she is getting back to me because she's mad at me. She's just super busy today, and she may have several other urgent messages in her queue. I've worked with my boss for a few years now, and I still have this reaction. It's part of my nature, but at least I'm aware of it. So be aware that as you and your mentee are getting to know each other, there will be a lot of possibility for annoyance because of the fundamental attribution error. Clear communication, setting clear expectations, and giving each other the benefit of the doubt for a while will help with this a lot. The third and final landmine is called confirmation bias, and that's the human tendency to interpret new information or evidence as confirmation of an existing belief, and to seek out new information that reinforces that belief rather than contradict it. Here's a fairly benign example. If I hold the belief that most left-handed people are creative, then when I encounter a left-handed creative person, I say to myself, see, I'm right. But when I encounter a left-handed person who's not creative, or a right-handed creative person, I might say, they're an exception. Where you might want to be aware of this as you work with your mentee is in a couple of potential areas. First, if your mentee has a strong belief that something is difficult, or beyond their capabilities. For example, a federal grant proposal or a logic model. It may be extra challenging for them to break that belief. They may even be subconsciously avoiding resources that could help them. Thus, it might take some extra effort on your part and some extra patience to help them in that area. Second, if your mentee has a strong belief that a coworker or a client, etc., is difficult or doesn't like them, like, "Ugh, my boss hates me," they may attribute extra meaning to negative interactions with that person, like, "She glared at me again, I really need to quit my job." And they might downplay neutral or positive interactions with that person. "Oh yeah, she got me a birthday card, but she probably felt she had to." As a mentor, if your mentee is asking for your advice in dealing with a difficult person, you might want to encourage them to start by describing just the facts as objectively as possible without putting meaning on them, because they might be in a confirmation bias kind of loop. So anyway, that's a lot of psychology right at the end. And as I said, GPA is not looking for you to become a social psychologist. We just want to make sure you've reviewed with you good communication and listening skills so that you and your mentee can develop the best relationship you can and have successful outcomes. So here's 3 final takeaways. If nothing else, please take these away. 1, when in doubt, over-communicate about what you're thinking and hearing. 2, encourage your mentee to give you as much feedback as you give them about what you're hearing and saying to each other. And 3rd, assume your mentee won't be as insightful or reflective about their communication as you are, at least at first. So be extra aware of potential communication challenges until you've gotten to know each other for a while. So that's it. Thanks for listening. We'll have a discussion thread set up on Grant Zone where you can chat about the content of this module and communication challenges you face as your year of mentoring begins. And if you would like to do any of your own research about any of the topics that we discussed today, you can Google active listening, ladder of inference, fundamental attribution error, or confirmation bias. Thanks again. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.